grab whatever magical elixir you need to stay awake. First and foremost, thank you all very much for being here. I love talking about Ohio. I love that I am from Ohio. I love that we still get to do our part to help turn out votes in Ohio. It's still incredibly important. Most of us have friends, family, beautiful Ohio moments that we want to make sure get preserved well into the future. We already went through everyone saying where they're from, which is great. Also, if you are from Ohio and you can let us know what congressional district you're at or what county you're from, there may be some people living abroad that can also connect with you that way. And before we get started with the speakers, I wanted to just again introduce the Ohio team. Actually, most of you are on it, which is super great. We are the Ohio State team. We are under the umbrella of Democrats Abroad, but instead of being focused on chapters in the regions we live, so for example, I'm in the Heidelberg chapter, we are focused on all of the people that vote in Ohio being on a team together, specifically to do outreach to Ohio voters, both our membership and to support voters living back home where possible. Our team has actually grown. We've had two other events this year. We had a kickoff event in January and we had Meet the Candidate in March, which was super awesome. You can check out both of those events online on our Facebook page or on our YouTube page. And since then, we have had Karen, we have Angela, if you can give a little wave at the camera, as part of our core team, but we have also been lucky enough to add Kenton. You can give a little wave. We have Christina, Christine, Jeff, Miguel, Laura, who's also here, Dawn, who's also here, Tom, Chase, Martha, and Colleen. So it is really exciting to see how much we've been able to grow just since the beginning of the year. So you can expect a lot more events from us, phone banking, hopefully some more Meet the Candidate events, voter protection and integrity events coming up. And you will hear a lot from us, especially making sure that you have requested your ballots and vote not only in the second upcoming primary. You heard that right, second primary, because reasons that our speakers will be happy to explain later. And of course, our general primary or general election that takes place in November. So in the meantime, again, not to be a dead horse, but we want to make sure that you are registered, that you're requesting your ballots. You can check out our chat links for all the links to be able to find out how you can do that. But it's pretty simple. It's votefromabroad.org. And there you can get, you can register to vote, you can request your ballot. If you have any questions or concerns, you can also contact us through there. Now, before we get us started, I would like to welcome our Democrats Abroad International Vice Chair and Akron native, Art Shinkler. Art? Art, you're muted.
All right, thanks. Thanks very much, Nikki. Just on behalf of Democrats Abroad, I want to welcome all of our participants, our speakers today. It's great to have you with us. As Nikki said, one of our innovations in this 2022 election year is the creation of state teams focused on key swing states and other states with important elections. This has helped us to focus on issues of importance to the states, to help fight voter suppression that's going on in those states, and to get out the vote among overseas Americans who are eligible to vote in those states. As many of you know, the percentage of Americans from overseas who are voting is still a small percentage, but what that means is we have great opportunities. Nikki mentioned, make sure you register and request your ballot, votefromabroad.org. Unfortunately, we all get one vote, despite what the Republicans claim. We only get one vote, but you can multiply your vote by reaching out to friends, family, whoever you know, and making sure that they vote. If everybody reaches out to 5 friends or family, we will win, and that's the way to multiply your vote. And of course, I also have to mention the other way to multiply your vote is by donating to Democrats Abroad. It's democratsabroad.org/donate. that really helps leverage what we do. It leverages all of the volunteer hours and really does get out the vote and helps multiply your vote. So that's another way to multiply your vote. As Nikki said, I am from Akron, although I vote in New York now. I live in Serbia. Karen, stop me if I start talking too much about Ohio politics of the 1960s. But one thing I will say is when I was a kid, we had a Democratic governor and 2 Democratic senators. So Ohio was at that time a blue state. And it's been that way, I think, one other time, I think the 80s as well. But I think we have a real opportunity to return to that in the future. In this election, 2 great candidates at the statewide level. Tim Ryan for Senate, Nate Whaley for governor. I think the message that Democrats can deliver about what Republicans are saying they will do and what Democrats are actually doing. Somebody needs to go on mute, maybe. What Democrats are actually doing is a message that will resonate with Ohio voters. Republicans are seriously talking about cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, raising taxes on everybody. And they're not talking about, when they talk about everybody, they're not talking about billionaires. They're talking about the poorest of Americans, raising taxes on those people. That's in Rick Scott's plan, and he's the head of the Republican Senate campaign committee. So when we talk about what Republicans are talking about doing, we can take them at their word. They've talked about restricting a woman's right to choose over the years, and now they've done it. And they're talking about restricting it in every state in the country. They mean business, and that's a message that I really don't think Ohioans want to hear. Whereas Democrats are delivering. They are reducing unemployment. They're putting people back to work at livable wages. They're expanding access to medical insurance and medical care to millions, and will continue to expand that access. So I think when you compare what Republicans are saying with what Democrats are actually doing, this is a message that will resonate in Ohio. But you'll hear from people who actually know what they're talking about, David Pepper and others during this session. So sorry. I just want to say one more comment about my Akron childhood. I'll close with this. We lived at the bottom of a hill, and at the top of a hill, there was a guy named Ray Bliss. I don't know if anybody knows who that was, but he was the chair of the Republican National Committee at the time in the 60s. And my brother was his paper boy. And he made sure to put a Johnson Humphrey bumper sticker on his mailbox. So I think Ohio is the place that we can put the Democratic bumper sticker on the Republican mailbox. So with that, I'll turn it back to whoever I'm turning it back to. Nikki, thanks. Thanks very much. Make sure everybody vote. Go Ohio. Thanks.
And thank you, Art. I'd like to put a bumper sticker on a couple of places in Ohio. Let me insert 2 quick reminders before we go ahead. First of all, keep an eye on the chat because we're going to be putting some links in there that you may want to check. And we will be keeping to schedule. Well, sort of, because one of our speakers couldn't make it due to a medical emergency. You'll hear more. So we're sort of stretching it out a little bit, but we'll try to stay on schedule and finish on time. So that being said, it is my great pleasure now to introduce our first guest, David Pepper. David chaired the Ohio Democratic Party from 2014 to 2021, and after that he returned to his law practice. But he had already been typing away at what became a 3-novel political thriller series, starting with The People's House and going on to The Wingman and The Voter File. Great fun reads and educational, instructive about how elections can be fiddled with and what we do about it. And you'll learn a lot if you pick those up. More recently, David's published the nonfiction Laboratory of Autocracy, and we're hearing excellent reviews about that as well, talking about how they do it and what we have to do about it. So in addition to that, he has launched Blue Ohio, a fundraising effort for down ballot candidates. And I'm terribly excited about that. The 88 county plan, as it used to be called. So that being said, David, tell us what it looks like on the ground in Ohio in 2022. The mic is yours.
Thanks, Karen. And thanks, everybody. Great to see everyone. Nikki, great to see you. I appreciate your enthusiasm in pushing this. I just tweeted out that everyone should join the effort to get people enlisted in their states. So let me just first say I'm a huge fan of Democrats Abroad. I'm really, as was said earlier, I view it, like Art said, as an opportunity. There is not a lot of low-hanging fruit in politics. To me, when you have a number of voters who are abroad from Ohio who are the size of the city of Toledo, or the size of the state of Wisconsin for the country, and only 20% of them are voting, that's a massive opportunity to get a lot more voters in Ohio and in the country. So I'm a huge fan in the mission, and I love this state team strategy. I think it makes a lot of sense to try and localize it. I also have a special place in my heart for this because I spent half my childhood living overseas. I lived in Brussels, I lived in Rome, I lived in Brussels, and I worked in Russia, in St. Petersburg after college. So I know in many ways, as the US goes through this very challenging time, whether it was during Trump or even now, you're on the front lines as much as we are, because every day you have people asking you what the hell is going on in our country. And so in some ways you feel it more than we do, where in a way, and I write about this in my book, in a way, we are letting it get normalized here in a dangerous way, but you may feel it more there in a way that it still feels so abnormal what's happening. And that's a lot of what I get into my book, which I'm not going to talk about too much today. Let me talk about the state of things on the ground. And I'll try, if I were chair still, I'd give a rah-rah speech. I'll still give a rah-rah speech about Ohio, but I also want to make sure we all sort of our eyes wide open about what's happening. The backdrop right now is that you are seeing, and this is what my book's about, a complete downward spiral in terms of the right-wing politics of Ohio. True downward spiral. I see Craig Swartz is on this call, one of our candidates. He'll describe it. Others, you're all watching the State House, and everyone's in on it. Mike DeWine used to be sort of a moderate. He can't say no to the far right. Portman is stepping aside. He couldn't say no. J.D. Vance is stepping in. He used to be someone who said he couldn't support Trump. Well, look at him now. All in, running around with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and embracing the replacement theory. I mean, the old Republican Party that Frank LaRose, Mia writes, don't let the politeness at times fool you. He would never have done what Brad Raffensperger did in Georgia. Never. Every single time the right wing asked LaRose to do something, he's our Secretary of State, whether it be ban drop boxes or purge, he's done it, despite every promise he made. So we're seeing the former, more moderate Bob Taft-style Republican Party disappear, crater, either because those people are losing or because they are spineless. By the way, you're going to find I'm very direct, or they're spineless, like Rob Portman and Mike DeWine, and are giving in to the far right. So there's a real unsettling feeling. In the last couple of days, I didn't mean to start this, but I have a lot of Ohioans tweeting at me. And by the way, if you're on Twitter, follow me at David Pepper if you want sort of minute by minute updates of Ohio. I tweet a lot. So many people saying, I don't want to even live here anymore. I want to move because the politics are crazy. That's what they want us to think, by the way. I'm not going anywhere. But we do have a real crisis that the far right is sort of splintering and away from the old mainstream party, and that far right is winning, which sets a lot of the backdrop for this coming election. By the way, and you've seen it especially, and Mia's one of my heroes in Ohio. She's an incredible grassroots leader. You've seen this especially come through in the intense law breaking around the gerrymandering process. You know, every state's had a struggle over gerrymandering, but only in Ohio has a sitting legislature broken the law in the wide open for a year, ignoring a court order 5 different times. Other states, they might have had their map upheld or not upheld, but then they actually followed the order of the court. In Ohio, they violated that order 5 times. And sadly, and this is the most depressing part, looks like they're going to get away with it in this cycle because of a horrific federal ruling by 2 Trump judges. So, I mean, it's true illegality for which I believe very strongly they must be held accountable. And I'm pushing for that so folks know. That's the backdrop. The other backdrop is, and I'll just having run in 10 and 14, it's a midterm. When we have the White House, that's difficult. But I also think as Art said, I think there's an opportunity this year too. And I'm just gonna go through these races very quickly and then open up the Q&A. And also talk about broader strategies that we have to start undertaking, which I think you can all be part of. I think J.D. Vance has lurched way to the right. In a way, if he had never lurched to the right, he'd actually be a far more formidable candidate right now. Running around with Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and if he had been the guy from the book, he'd actually be much more formidable because he'd have an appeal with independents, maybe even some Democrats in rural areas. But he's gone all in on the far right. And if you know much about Tim Ryan, he's a very good candidate. I think he can occupy that middle ground. And 2 polls came out last week. One had Tim ahead, one had Tim down by 2, even though Biden was in the high 30s. That's the potential of that matchup. I think Tim can way overperform Democrats, sort of national Democrats, because of his strength. I mean, I said this to a national reporter the other day. They love covering J.D. Vance. I said to a national reporter, has it ever occurred to you that maybe Tim Ryan is the real J.D. Vance? Grew up in a blue-collar town, in a blue-collar family, never left, never wrote a book and moved to San Francisco. By the way, I'm not against writing books, but never picked up and moved to San Francisco and said he no longer felt comfortable in Ohio, but stayed in his hometown. Maybe he's the real, and I think that's true, actually. He's the real Ohio story. Vance is someone who wrote a book about it and then left. He has no footprint here. So I think there's an opportunity there. Now, again, we have to have the overall environment be good enough by Biden, not so bad that no one can win. And that happens sometimes. I was on the ballot in 14 and 10. You couldn't win. But you look at Tim Ryan's numbers, and he's hanging in there. The other thing I'd say about the environment, in addition to some of the tougher stuff, is there's also a lot of uncertainty right now. There's the war in Ukraine, where people like Vance and so many Republicans have either said they don't care or are even voting in a weird pro-Russia way. We have a congressman in Ohio, Warren Davidson. He just got gerrymandered into part of Hamilton County. He literally voted to not collect evidence of war crimes in Ukraine. The support for the war in Ukraine, for the Ukrainian side in America, is overwhelming, as you probably know. So I think there's a potential problematic issue for Republicans who can't seem to, Portman being an exception, support Ukraine. And I think that could be another issue. I also think right now the other potential issues to unsettle things for Republicans are this horrible but likely decision by the Supreme Court to get rid of Roe v. Wade. I think the gun issue continues to really percolate. And potentially, although I can't say I'm overconfident about this, the January 6th Commission just really exposing how corrupt that was. It might expose people like Jim Jordan and others who we don't know about being totally part of it. Those things are all out there. So there's some tough stuff, there's some good stuff, but that's where I think if we look at the Tim Ryan, J.D. Vance race, if those things play out in a way that leads to some balance, although even some advantage for Republicans in Ohio in a midterm, I think Tim Ryan, as long as it's not a runaway, I think he's got a real opportunity. And if our biggest problem in midterms is when we have the White House is Democrats don't show up as much. And this is why your work is so important. If the issue around Roe v. Wade or the issue around guns gets young people to turn out who really fall off in midterms, and that evens out, that's when Tim Ryan might vault to victory. So but I think he's certainly close enough that that as long as like there's some balance, Tim's got a real shot. And by the way, he's running a great campaign in terms of organized fundraising. I mean, Tim is the lion's share of the dollars that are allowing the Ohio Democratic Party to put a team on the ground of organizers. That's largely because of Tim's very prolific fundraising and the interest in that race. So that's going to be a signature race. And I think Tim is a very good candidate. Let me talk about the statewide races. There's a great group of people running. Nan Whaley for governor, the other statewide offices. A poll now, DeWine is better known than J. Oh, by the way, on the polling for J.D. Vance and Tim has a higher approval rating and a lower disapproval rating than J.D. Vance. Again, it's a good matchup if the broader environment is right and if Tim runs a good campaign. The interesting thing about a poll the other day, I mean, I don't think anyone would tell you that DeWine is not the favorite to be the governor again. He is. Be clear about that. Nan's the underdog. But there's also an opportunity. If you look at a poll the other day that came out on DeWine, and I went through this Republican split, and this is why I mentioned it. To get reelected, Mike DeWine couldn't even break 50% in his own primary. The poll the other day against Nan Whaley, who's never run statewide before, DeWine still only hit 45%. That's not a great number if you're the incumbent governor. Some independent who's more conservative was getting 11%. Most people don't know Nan yet. You don't get known in Ohio until you really are putting money up. So the fact that DeWine was only at 45 actually surprised me. I thought it actually would be higher at this point. He just ran and won a primary. He's on the news every day. So there's opportunity, and that's why is he only 45? Because even though he's frankly given up his old moderate tendencies, people still view him as a rhino. The far right just doesn't embrace him. By the way, he's acting a far right nut on every issue. He's signing everything the legislature gives his way, but they still don't give him credit for that. So the fact that he's only at 45 is actually, I think, the opportunity. I mean, Nan's got to run a great campaign. She's got to get her numbers up. But DeWine being at 45, I see Craig nodding. I assume you agree with me. That's a very, that's just not a good number for a guy who literally has been in office as a statewide official for almost 50 years. That's pretty tepid. Most of the statewide outcomes follow that governor's race, just to be clear. In 18, Cordray lost by 3.7. Almost everyone below Cordray lost by 3.7. So it really follows that. And that's why DeWine being at that number is actually, I think that gives some hope. Again, what are the issues that need to percolate? Democrats need to show up bigger than they usually do. And that's going to take a lot of work. And these candidates need to really connect on key issues. But then I want to get to one set of races that is so important. And I think you're going to have them on a future call. And please do. The thing I'm most proud of, although I wish I could say we won everything when I was chair, we obviously didn't. But we won 3 out of 4 Supreme Court races. And I think we're all seeing right now why that matters so much. I wish we had a better map right now. If we did not have 3 new Supreme Court candidates, the first map the Republicans put out would have been the map. Instead, they got struck down. The map we may get stuck with is still gerrymandered, but frankly, it's a lot better than the one a couple years ago. And it's a lot better than the one we would have been stuck with. Why are the Republicans refusing to follow the law right now? And they keep saying, well, let's decide it after November. Their entire game for a year, and I think it's all illegal, I said they should be held accountable for it, has been to wait out the current Supreme Court, to win in November when Maureen O'Connor is no longer Chief Justice, and then to have 4 Republicans who uphold whatever they do in the future. That's their game plan. Completely, some of you are near some pretty autocratic type places. It's like what an autocrat would do. Change the court makeup so something you did that was illegal becomes legal. That's their plan. Do you know the best way to keep that from happening? Beat them in November in these court races and have 4 Democrats or 5 Democrats on the Ohio Supreme Court. And we can do that. You remember the first Jennifer Bruner's running for Chief Justice against Kennedy. Jennifer Bruner was the single biggest overperformance in 2020 in any state that Trump won, when she won by 10, even though Trump won by 8. That's one opportunity. She would be a phenomenal Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice in Ohio, and you all probably see this, it takes on a much bigger figure than every other justice. It's sort of like the equivalent of the governor for the whole system. And O'Connor's played that role, and Bruner can play it too. We need her. Justice Kennedy is a right winger and would be really, she's dissented in every single one of these gerrymandering cases, basically saying she'll do whatever the legislature wants her to do, be a disaster. But here's the other opportunity. Remember the numbers I told you about Mike DeWine? Well, his son is running for re-election, Pat DeWine. Pat DeWine also, because of that far right group, will struggle to get people to vote for him from the Republican side in the numbers he needs. There's a huge opportunity, I believe, hidden to unseat Pat DeWine. That one race, again, I know you're recording this, in some ways for the future of Ohio's democracy, beating Pat DeWine is the most important race on the Ohio ballot this November. Because if you beat him, and he's kind of vulnerable because his name is DeWine, Republicans don't like him, you get yourself a 4th Democratic Chief Justice. If Bruner loses, Bruner stays in the court no matter what happens, okay? But if she wins, DeWine replaces her, appoints her replacement. So her, although we need her in that Chief Justice spot, she doesn't change the makeup of the court. DeWine losing does. And so if you have one person, now Terry Jameson, though, is also running against a guy named Pat Fisher, another incumbent Republican, equal impact. If we can beat either Fisher or DeWine, we get ourselves a 4-Democrat Supreme Court. And guess what we've just done? Defeated their entire strategy of waiting for a better court. Can you think of anything more fun than that? I can't. Having worked my you-know-what off to win the 3 spots in the first place. So please, 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 we just can't tell people to vote. We got to make sure they vote through the Supreme Court races. I'll just simply say, and I don't want to talk too much about Blue Ohio because that's not the purpose of this call. I believe we need and this is for another time for me to go through all my strong beliefs here. And if you want a short version, well, it's not short, but read the book. We have a massive problem as a party, and I say this having been a chair, of every battle is only about the next cycle. And we don't have enough long-term strategies. And that's why I love what you're building with the state teams. And one of the things that we've done so poorly for every cycle I've seen, because we only have a short-term mindset, is we only care about swing districts for Congress and State House. And in a state like Ohio, where most of the attack on democracy is at the State House, and where rural voters don't know what we're about, only competing in swing areas and leaving dozens of districts uncontested or so underfunded they might as well be uncontested is a disaster. It means total lack. The reason they're behaving the way they behave in the State House is because no one knows who these people are. They're so gerrymandered, they don't think they're accountable because they're not. And they can do the craziest things and then run the next cycle without even an opponent. It's like catnip. And so I'm a big believer that we have to run in every district. And when you have people like Craig and others step up in rural districts that are tougher, don't have the phone, oh, you're in a 70-30 district. Sorry, I can't help you. You're in a 70-30 district. Thank you. You are running in the hardest district. You're a hero for democracy. How can I help? We have to flip our mindset so we're running everywhere, holding people accountable everywhere, because the lack of accountability for being crazy is what's driving our system downward. And that's why I did start this thing called Blue Ohio. It's basically a way to crowdfund. You know, again, I'm about to stop, but I get on my soapbox here. I don't mind that Amy McGrath raised $100 million. Good for her. That's what she's supposed to do. But shame on us for giving her $100 million while 30 seats across the river in Ohio were uncontested. That's what's crazy. We need to figure out how to convince small dollar donors that investing in State House candidates across the state is actually the better investment long-term for democracy than the sexy Senate race that we're probably not going to win anyway. And that's what Blue Ohio is. It's a way to create that process. And the truth is, although I love Ohio, I want to do it in every state. We have to start competing in every district of every state, because the current framework, and by the way, Jamie Harrison's a good friend. He gets this. This needs to be talked about from Joe Biden on down. The current framework of only fighting every 2 years in federal swing states and districts is a loser when it comes to democracy itself, because so much of the attack on democracy, most of it is in state houses, and it's happening from people who don't even have a challenge in the next election. Until we change that, we're not going to succeed. So beyond, and that's why that Supreme Court race is so important. Again, I talked about Tim's, but all the way through. And the final thing I'll say is the map also is going to give us some opportunities for Congress in Ohio as well. So there's some opportunity to pick up state house seats because of there is a chance to gain seats because of the better map. There is a chance to win, for example, the Cincinnati congressional seat. But my big picture mindset is, and I hope you can help me with this, and I'm happy to talk about it or invite you all to one of these Blue Ohio meetings. We've got to change our mindset so we are running everywhere and we are supporting people everywhere. Because until we do that, we're making it too easy for the other side to do what they're doing. So with that, I'll stop talking. Happy to take any questions you have.
Our first question is from Kenton Barnes. Do you want to ask your question, Kenton?
Yep, actually, this is a two-part question. When I was reading the returns for the primary election in May, I was really quite concerned because it seemed like the Republican turnout was twice as much as the Democratic turnout. And how are we going to, what is the Democratic Party doing in Ohio to make sure that voters in Ohio are turning out to vote? And secondly, it seems as if the minority vote, particularly African Americans, has really slacked off in this last cycle. Is there a way that the Democratic Party of Ohio is trying to engage minority voters, particularly African Americans and the Hispanic vote?
Yeah, thank you for your excellent questions. Amia just wrote, I mean, the Republican, I don't want to sort of dilute your concern, because anytime you see one party show up with more votes than the other, it's a worry. At the same time, I will tell you, over the last 20 years, if you look at primary turnout and ultimate November turnout, it's not a very good predictor. There was a lot of dynamism in that Republican primary. I mean, all of them had spent millions. As Mia just wrote, a lot of ours turned out to vote against Mike DeWine in that primary. So there was more. If you had been here, you saw TV ads for months for the Republican primary. We had a contested governor's primary here, but it really was almost a last couple weeks primary. And Tim Ryan, although he had an opponent who I respect in Morgan Harper, it wasn't a real primary. So again, if I were just so you know, Ken, I'm not the chair of the party anymore, so I can't speak for the party. If I were the chair of the party, I would be looking through those numbers too and say, what happened? How concerned should we be? How do we fix that? But I wouldn't also overread it either, because their primaries have uniqueness to them that often lead. You know, if you go back over the years, there have been many years where Democrats had more in the primary and then lost, and vice versa. And Mia can take that up too. I think that if you look, and again, I'm not here to sell my book, but man, the purging has devastated the minority. So the purpose of the purging of Ohio was and the gerrymandering and all the voter suppression was to destroy the Obama coalition that turned Ohio blue, which is what it was. I mean, let's be clear. The vast amount of purging has been voters of color in our big cities, because those voters of color in 2008 delivered this state, not just for Obama, but for statewide officials, we had a Democratic state house majority in 2010. We had 10 of 18 congressional districts. Why? Because that Obama coalition was strong. And once they got power in 10, their goal was dismantle, and they did it all over the country, dismantle that coalition. And so I go through in the book, the registration numbers in Cuyahoga County and Hamilton County and in Columbus and Dayton of Black voters are a catastrophe. And you see it in every election. When I ran for mayor of Cincinnati, by the way, Angela, I don't know if you were here then, but it was a very exciting race. I lost by a couple points. The turnout in 2005 for my mayor's race was so much higher than it's been in the last 5 years for mayor of Cincinnati now. Why? Because urban Cincinnati is so much less registered and voting in much lower numbers. So we've seen a dismantling of the broad coalition. And so to your question is, I think the effort to re-enlist all these voters needs to be 24/7 every year, no matter the election cycle. If we wait for candidates, it's too late and it's not enough. Hillary Clinton spent her entire field operation the last 6 months of 2016 trying to find and re-register all of those candidates. All those voters in Cuyahoga County, for example. Didn't even come close. And in the meantime, she wasn't communicating with the registered voters or the swing voters because she was spending all the time on those unregistered voters that had been purged. So the bottom line is their purging worked. And if you think about purging in this very technical world where every campaign is micro-targeting, if someone's not even on the rolls, they're not hearing from anybody. They're not getting a phone call or a digital message. They're like in a different world. So it's led to this downward spiral of participation by particularly African-American voters, and it's changing outcomes. So I think to your point, I think nonstop engagement, registration by both the party and by other groups is so critical if we're going to start doing better. Now it's late in this year to do that, but yeah, the numbers are terrible, and they're the result of voter suppression, purging, and again, this short-term mindset on the Democratic side that we only run around the last few months to talk to these people instead of having it be a nonstop engagement. So there's a lot of work to do there. It's a great question and a real concern.
Okay. All right. Our next questions comes from Facebook. It's from Kelly Simon. She's actually a climate scientist. And she would like, here's what she said when you were talking about Tim Ryan. Tim Ryan also hasn't responded to any feedback from scientific/environmental justice standpoints. How can we, the little people, get him to take on this issue a little bit?
He's general. Okay, I can't speak to the communications. By the way, I'm going to put my email up, and if you're on Facebook or here, if you have a question like that, frankly, I'm happy to forward whatever you have. My email is davidpepper4ohio@gmail.com. If you have something I'm happy to forward it to Tim. Oh, sorry, that is not how my name is spelled. I would think Tim, correct, the person asking would know more than me. I think Tim would have a good record there, and I would think he'd be on the same page as climate scientists. Tim is one of the best parts about his messaging, I think, is he's a huge believer in pivoting and taking advantage of the green economy in Ohio. No state is better positioned. You wouldn't know it from the behavior of these bought off politicians in Columbus, but no state is better positioned to grow jobs through the green economy than Ohio because of our manufacturing base. Honestly, to the questioner, and I'm not just here to defend Tim Ryan, but I believe this sincerely, no one talks about that issue better than Tim Ryan. He understands it. He's the one thinking about how can we make parts, solar parts and wind turbine parts in Ohio? How do we take advantage of that? So I think, my reading of Tim has been that he's good on these issues, but especially when it comes to, this is the hard part. How do you connect those issues back to voters whose number one concern are jobs in the economy? No one does that better than Tim Ryan. So I think that's something that I hope he's strong with. And if you want me to try and get him a message, here's my email. You can do that. And if anyone else wants to communicate with me, you can send me an email there too.
Okay. I have a question, David.
Sure.
Just kind of going back to the sort of Black voters in Ohio. A couple of years ago, my sister, who lives in Cincinnati, wanted to get involved in politics. Since I was doing work on the overseas vote, she decided she should do something too. She went to the Cincinnati Democratic Party, and asked them about getting out the vote in the Black community. And they told her they weren't going to do anything because Black people don't vote. Hopefully this still isn't the attitude. I mean, 'cause
Hopefully whoever said that is no longer there. That would be, that's horrible. I hate to say it. If Black people don't vote, Democrats won't win anything.
yes,
And by the way, that's not true. Obviously, we would not have Joe Biden if Black people didn't vote in enormous numbers through a lot of obstacles in Atlanta, Georgia, and Detroit, and Philadelphia. And do you know who knows that Black people vote? The Republicans. That's why they're always changing the rules that in a way that precisely impacts Black. Let me put it this way. And again, this is in my book too. They didn't care about drop boxes when they were in Anchorage, Alaska, and Salt Lake City, Utah, where they've been for years. Why are they banning drop boxes? Because Black voters used them to a huge degree in Atlanta and Detroit in 2020, and we know that those voters predominantly chose Joe Biden. So that's obviously the horrifically wrong answer. It's just not correct, but also the reason that they are so intent. I mean, no water at the polls in Georgia, long lines everywhere, purging that predominantly impacts and disproportionately impacts Black voters. The Republicans know, like I said earlier, that Obama coalition, that is the future of America. That diversity is the future of America. And if it shows up in votes, which it will do if we do our job well, that we win. And the reason they are targeting that coalition so intensely is because they know that. So yeah, anyone who said that, totally inappropriate. I will say though, on the flip side, and this goes back to Kenton's question as well, the engagement of Black voters in our core cities has not been what it needs to be. And they've also been the people most directly targeted by purging. And so I think there needs to be a doubling down on efforts to get to those voters. If I had a bunch of money at my disposal to do this, I would literally have nonstop paid organizers knocking on doors in Avondale, in Cleveland, in Walnut Hills, going not to the doors of the people who vote every day, but going to the apartment buildings where no one votes and signing them up. And do you know who I'd hire to do this? No offense to young college kids. I'd hire people from the community to do it, who are known and recognized. And they're the ones knocking on the door. They're the ones saying, this is why you need to sign up and register. But don't just register, stay engaged like your sister tried to do. That's, to me, maybe the most important investment is that and by the way, there's a group in Florida that I really like called Mi Vecino, which means my neighborhood. They basically are doing what I just described. Every month, look them up, by the way, it's a great model. And they hire local, in the community, Hispanic staff who do the organizing work. And they are in the communities that they are registering, they live there. And I think that's the kind of effort it's going to take to take the numbers that are truly, horrific and turn them around. I go through in the book, the decline in voter registration in Cincinnati and Cleveland, Dayton does not track census data. The census shows that some of these counties grew, like Hamilton County, but the number of voters declined. They're purging people who are still here. And we need to go find those people and get them back on the rolls.
All right, we have one last question from Art. If you could make it short, that'd be great.
Sure. Sorry. Hey, I will try. I would point that target of those people who don't vote is our target for Democrats abroad. And that's why we spend a lot of money on digital advertising, trying to reach those people, as we've discussed, a big low-hanging fruit. I call it gold on the ground. But my question was, when I talk to people in the party, they're always talking about coming up with a message with 3 main points. I don't know if you agree with that philosophy that we need to come up with a single message with maybe two, but if you do, what would it be for Ohio voters?
For Ohio, so one of the things I talk about is, there's so much corruption right now. You guys know this. We were literally named the most corrupt state in the country. But it's now so baked into politics that just screaming about corruption doesn't get you anywhere. People just think everyone's corrupt, and sadly, enough Democrats get in trouble. I get why they think that. I also believe democracy is in deep trouble. in states like Ohio. I mean, they literally are attacking democracy at the Ohio State House just as they are in Hungary. It's the same stuff. But campaigning on democracy, you lose people. My view in Ohio, if I were Nan Whaley, and she's doing this to some degree, and I make this argument in my book, part and parcel with corruption, and you see this in the countries near where you all live, part and parcel with corruption and lack of democracy come horrific public outcomes that you cannot defend. You know, you see it right now with the Russian military, decades of corruption, a hollowed out military. They can't do some of those basic things because it's so corrupted. Well, Ohio and Kansas and all these other states that have had corrupt and rigged, undemocratic state houses also have horrific public outcomes. And I go through this in Kansas. Why is there a Democratic governor of Kansas? Because the net result of terrible trickle-down policies and corruption there, but essentially, basically, these state houses have become massive institutions that are moving public funds to private players. The privatization of schools, the giveaways to utilities. You know, it's just a basic movement of public resources to private players that lobby these state houses. And inevitably, that will lead to a decline in the public side, right? Well, in Kansas, that took place. They only had 4 days of school a week. What did Laura Kelly run on to become governor of Kansas, of all places? She could have talked about how bad Chris Kobach was on voting rights, and he was. She ran on the fact that there were only 4 days of school a week in Kansas. And that's an issue that everyone at their dining room table is going to say, yeah, why the hell did that happen? And so my point is, I think Democrats, in addition to standing by our values on things like Roe and things like guns, where we stand with the majority, just to be clear, we shouldn't hide from these issues. We're with the majority. Most people don't want to ban books. Most people don't want to see Roe v. Wade go away. Most people want common sense gun reform. We need to stop thinking we're in the minority on these issues. We're in the majority. That's why they gerrymander, because they know they lose in fair districts. But we also need to pinpoint the disastrous public outcomes that are an inevitable result of their corruption and run on those. So in Kansas, 4 days of school a week. In Texas, what is it? Beto's right. Why do people freeze to death in Texas in the wintertime? Because they privatize the energy grid. That's a topic that any Texan can sit around and think, I don't know about this politics issue or that one, but yeah, why are people freezing to death in Texas? In Michigan, how do we get a Democratic governor in Michigan? What was her campaign? Fix the damn roads because they're falling apart. If I were in Ohio, if I were running for governor, I'd make it about schools, which were ranked, we all grew up in a state with wonderful public schools, didn't we? Only 12 years ago, Ohio public schools were ranked 5th in the country. Now they're 26th because they're giving it all away. I'd run on that in a very Ohio fix the damn roads way. I also would say, and a lot of you are from sort of bigger cities, but some of you from smaller towns in Ohio are dying. It's not because of the wall. It's not because of immigrants. It's because they've been defunded by the state house for decades. And I would run, Craig, you could do this. I do this all the time. I go to a small town and I take a video and say, this is brought to you by a corrupt Republican state house that has taken your funds and given it out as tax breaks to their big donors. That's exactly what's happened. So I would get into the things in Ohio that are visibly falling apart because of their corruption, and I'd focus on those things. And that's how you have Democratic governors in states like Kansas and Michigan and Kentucky, really, is those are less political, they're less partisan, and they're about outcomes that everyday people care about. So it's the result of the corruption that I'd focus on as much as I can, as I could.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you very much for your energy, for sharing your wisdom, your hard-earned wisdom from years and years of experience in the battleground of Ohio. Is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump off because I've got to deal with a family that all went to bed too late. But I really appreciate your doing it. I look forward to seeing you again in July.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much,
Here for our July 10th event. Thank
Okay,
you so
awesome.
much.
See ya.
Thank you.
Okay, I know on the agenda, it originally listed Brian Sleeth as our next speaker. Unfortunately, he is not available, but I'm a little biased and very excited to introduce our next speaker. This is the woman that got me into politics. So just bear with my cheesiness for a minute. I am introducing Lynn Mccoy. She is part of the Greene County Board of Elections. Since 1993, she is a graduate of the Election Center. She has been the deputy director or director since 2004 of the Greene County Board of Elections. And she is also a two-term past president of the Ohio Association of Election Officials. So she is actually going to be running us through a little bit about how the primary went, what to expect for the second primary, challenges with UVCAVA voters in general, and then we'll also be able to do a Q&A. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And I really was interested in hearing David Pepper speak. I was lucky enough to be his dinner companion a few years ago at a Montgomery County event. And I tell you, if you can ever snag him for dinner, he's a great guy to sit next to and talk to. So I know a lot of people wanted to know how the election went, how election officials are holding up. And, you know, we thought after we got through COVID, my goodness, what could possibly come next? And here we are. But we are election officials. It's what we do. And we're holding up really, really well. So we are ready for you. The election now is August 2nd. Normally, that's a special election for those of us in Ohio, and typically we only see questions and issues on that ballot. But the second half of the primary election has been added onto that ballot. So what you're going to see is your state house races, you're going to see your state representatives, and you're going to see state central committee candidates on those ballots. A lot of counties may have some issues. I know here in Greene County we have one. Typically, issues sometimes will draw out voters that might not otherwise turn out. But I think with this election, we're looking at a low turnout. In Greene County, for example, last primary election, it was 25.5%. So that's pretty low. The other thing, particularly for you folks that are UOCAVA voters, we have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And because of that, we tend to have a lot of UOCAVA voters. And in a presidential election, we usually have between 300 and 400 folks voting from overseas. Now, with this last election, we only had 17. So that's going to tell you something about the turnout that we're getting from overseas voters. And I do think that voters are burnt out. I think they aren't sure about what's going on with this election. I think, you know, we weren't sure until last weekend. So how could anybody else be sure? So just some general things I know you folks might be interested in knowing. If you had not voted in the past primary, can you vote in this one? Absolutely. Keep in mind and I'm really not a political person, but I will let you know that as far as I know, people will be able to change their party affiliation with this election. And then that party affiliation will be what sticks with that voter for the next couple of years. So that being said, if you haven't registered at all, you have until July the 5th. If you have requested UOCAVA ballots for this year, you should receive your ballot. If you have requested by email, you should receive that emailed ballot on June 17th. I will say that for those of you that do send us email addresses, please check and make sure that those email addresses are correct, and make sure that your secondary contact information is correct. One of the biggest problems that we have in Greene County is we're getting old or incorrect email addresses, and we can try 3 times to email to you, but once we have gone through that and they bounce back to us, we have to send them to you by mail. And I think we all realize that the U.S. Postal Service is burdened right now, and mail is really, really slowing down. So that is something, if you can email your UOCAVA request to us, please do that. Also, please make sure that when you get that ballot, that you're voting it and getting it back in. The timelines that there were a little bit different in the earlier primary for you are no longer in effect. So you still have the regular 10 days to get your ballot back, that you had before. So there is no extended period. We have to have those CAVA ballots, excuse me, back in our office by August the 12th.
Okay, all right. Does anyone have any questions?
We have Karen. She has
Yes,
her
and
hand up.
I'm unmuted already because I was going to follow right up on what Lynn just said. The first primary, because they decided about it a bit late and they knew we were short on time to get those ballots returned. The ballots arrived with a mailing label for a courier to get it back.
Right.
It worked for some of us. There were some reports from up, I think in Sweden, that they had FedEx and it didn't get back, or they charged them extra for it. It was, I haven't heard any outcome on that. This time though, the ballot drop will be 45 days ahead, plus we have the 10 days after. So there's no send your ballot back for free. We're going to have to get it there either by mail or pay a courier ourselves. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, while we're waiting, I actually have a question. So we've seen in the news that people are talking about having, GOP or specifically like Trump right-wing poll watchers maybe showing up to do some, voter intimidation. Can you speak a little bit about that? Is that something you're worried about?
It's not something that we're worried about in Ohio. And again, as a participant in the CERA program, you get to hear what happens in other states, and there are poll watchers there, but in Ohio, there really aren't. There are appointed observers that can be inside the polling location, and those folks, I can't just show up and say, oh, guess what? I want to be, I'm a Trump supporter. I'm going to go in and I'm going to watch the polls. I can't do that. I have to be appointed, and only the state central committee, the local committee, candidates can appoint observers, and questions and issues committees can appoint observers. And there are rules they have to follow. One of those rules being they cannot really interact with voters inside the polling location. So they get trained, our poll workers get trained, and if they abuse the ability to be inside the polling location, we'll typically send board members out and have a conversation with them. And if we have to do it, we do have the ability to remove those people. So typically we do not have that kind of voter intimidation thing going on. At least it's not something that we've seen here in Greene County.
I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay.
Oh, wait, but Mia would like to make.
Yeah, would it be okay if I, and hi, Lynn, I'm with Common Cause Ohio, and we, I kind of wear a bunch of different hats. I'm fair districts for this call, but I work for Common Cause Ohio, and we're part of Election Protection Coalition. So as Lynn says, those are the folks who are allowed to be inside, which is very, very, people can't just go in, but outside of the 100-foot kind of protection area, we have in certain polling locations, election protection, nonpartisan election protection volunteers who are there just to kind of be eyes and ears on the ground and see if there's anything, untoward going on, and, help voters if they're not sure if they're in the right polling location, that kind of thing. And that is a national coalition that has a hotline, which is 866-OUR-VOTE. And folks call from all over the country in, and they report things that are happening, even little things like the electricity went out and, in such and such a place, and, there was a windstorm and, whatever. And then they sort of tally those up, and they look at the kinds of problems that people have been having at polling locations. And sometimes there are things of people, it's called electioneering, where they're too close to the entrance to the polling location, and they, something like that. And I just wanted to say, I completely agree with what Lynn said in terms of what Ohio usually has, but I do feel like things are changing in the country very quickly, and that elections officials are under a lot more pressure than they used to be in terms of people kind of second guessing their, what's happening, and also misunderstanding how elections are carried out in Ohio, they don't really understand that it's a, there's a bipartisan, there isn't really an opportunity for people to, do fraudulent, things. And so there's a lot of suspicion, et cetera. But I will note that in this past primary, for the first time ever, we got 3 calls logged into our hotline that were about kind of inappropriate behavior from polling officials. Now, those aren't necessarily people who work for the boards of elections. They're people who are hired just to work on election day. People saying things like someone requesting, in a primary, you have to say whether you want a D or an R ballot. And people saying like, requesting a Democratic ballot, and the person saying like, are you sure? Oh my gosh, or, things like that. So, we're in this kind of weird situation where it's really important that good people work at the Board of Elections, and yet working there is kind of increasingly difficult and challenging. So, and then there's also the issue of, the maps aren't great, and some people feel offended at working to uphold an election when there are bad maps. So in any case, I just wanted to lift up the fact that there is some election protection efforts that go on outside of the polling place. But it's with the number of polling locations that there are across Ohio, it's just very, very few. Anyway.
And with that being said, Mia, I'm going to introduce you now.
Okay.
First, I wanted to ask too, Craig, you've been faithful on this call for a long time, and Mia has as well. We're way over schedule. But if Mia can go ahead and give her presentation, and then perhaps you could say a few words before we close up, because we noticed that you're back again, and we really love having you here. Can you do that? Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay, so I joined Mia Lewis and the Fair Districts volunteers for a few of the Ohio Redistricting Commission hearings. It was brain numbing watching and irritating, to watch these Republicans trying to sound like grown-ups, dragging their heels, shoving us toward the outcome that they were going to have anyhow, law be damned, hell or high water. So I met Mia, however, through the Indivisible group on Facebook for Ohio 12, which I used to be in. Now I'm gerrymandered over to Ohio 3, but same difference. We're all Central Ohioans. Mia is, that's a side route of connecting with people. She's on staff at Ohio Common Cause and is one of the leads in the Fair Districts coalition. So having gone through the last defeat, Mia, have you recovered? And could you let us see what the maps look like? It's yours.
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. And no, I haven't recovered. I don't think we'll ever recover from the whole redistricting process. It's really disappointing just because so many people worked so hard to get those those changes in our constitution to end gerrymandering. That's what we thought we were doing. And people worked really, really hard, myself included. And, it was just like they didn't care at all. So anyway, I'm going to run through a few slides. I'm going to go really fast. But what I'm going to do is just share these slides with y'all afterwards, and you can look at them, and there's some links and things. So I'm just going to look at the General Assembly maps, the congressional maps, some lawsuits that are going on, things that you can do, and then some links. So just to kind of summarize, the Redistricting Commission, I'm sure you guys know a lot of this. So again, I will go quickly. They passed 5 sets of General Assembly maps. That's Ohio House and Ohio Senate maps. All 5 were struck down as unconstitutional by the Ohio Supreme Court. And in 3 of those cases, the 3rd set of maps, when it came time for the 4th set, they just submitted like very, very tiny, insignificant changes to the 3rd set. And then when it came to the time for the 5th set, they literally just resubmitted the 3rd set. So basically the 3rd, 4th, and 5th sets of maps were either identical or virtually identical. The Supreme Court gave them very specific orders about when and how they needed to draw maps, and they just openly defied those orders. They have not been held in contempt, which is distressing because, as you know, like David, I've lived in other countries, and I know that, going by the rule of law, even if you're a high official, is really the difference, makes a big difference in how a country, in what happens in a country. So basically their goal was to end up with a gerrymandered cost map, and they got there, at all costs. So they disobeyed the Constitution, which required bipartisan work and public work. They rejected the incredible public input that was the testimony that was given by hundreds and hundreds of Ohioans all across the state. And they submitted, very skillfully gerrymandered maps. And of course, they ran out the clock. And they also worked. There was a group of Republican operatives who filed a federal lawsuit relating to the General Assembly map. And in the end, that is what kind of did us in, because even though the Ohio Supreme Court was willing to go back again and again and again to try to make sure that we had constitutional maps, the federal court ended up imposing the third set of maps as what we're going to use this year. And they also set that August 2nd deadline. That was a 3-judge panel. In the dissent, Judge Marbley said, basically, what you're doing is rewarding these guys for this unconstitutional behavior, and you're ignoring, all of the work that went into that constitutional change, and you're undermining the court. So, sorry, that was a very, very upsetting and unnecessary outcome. This is what the maps look like. There are links here. And the problem with the maps is in what they call in the fact that there are so many toss-up seats. So when the Republicans kind of count how the maps add up, they take all those toss-ups, almost all of which are Democratic leaning, and they add them to the Democratic total, and then they say, see, it's all equal. But what that means is that the Democratic seats are a ceiling, whereas the Republican seats are a floor. So in a blue wave, the Democrats won't get any more seats because the Republican seats are very, very secure. They have a wide margin of victory. Whereas if there's a red wave, the Republicans could gain an additional 19 seats in the House. So it's, they're very skillfully gerrymandered. It's the same in the House and in the Senate. And Karen brought this up, so I just thought I would mention, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think you guys may know that when they were drawing the 4th set of maps, the court had required that they use an independent mappers, and the Republicans and Democrats hired independent mappers. They came in, we paid them $100,000. They drew maps that were actually quite fair. And these are those maps. And then in the very last moment, that's when they, decided not to, the Republicans on the Redistricting Commission said, well, these maps aren't complete, which really wasn't true. They were basically finished, and there was no reason to toss them out. So these are the maps that we could have had. All of Ohio got to watch them drawing maps. It was public. There was input. It was bipartisan. The process actually worked until the Republicans on the commission just basically, flushed this down the toilet. There was no reason for it. These are some spider charts that kind of show the difference between the independent and the adopted maps. So, and the important number to look at there is proportionality, which means how closely it comes to how Ohioans really vote, which is 54 Republican, 46 Democrat over a 10-year period. That's the ratio that's required in the Constitution. And the map that's adopted is 69% proportional, and the map that the independent mappers did was 91% proportional. So you can see there's a very big difference there. And this is for the Senate maps. So going on to the congressional map, again, there was, one map that was found unconstitutional. They drew a second map. There are 2 lawsuits going, active lawsuits. We're waiting for the ruling from the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, we voted on this map, which still could be found unconstitutional in May. And that's what we're probably going to vote on in November. I mean, yes, we're going to vote on it in November. Again, it is still a gerrymander. It is not proportional. And you can see, if you look at District 1 and District 15, those are the kind of most egregiously gerrymandered. And, although Ohio, it's a little complicated with the Voting Rights Act, we can't really win suits that relate to the Voting Rights Act. That doesn't mean that African-American voters aren't targeted for gerrymandering. If you look at District 1, basically what that is breaking up Hamilton County and breaking up the African-American vote there and diluting it by putting it in a rural county, to ensure an outcome there. And that's kind of similar things that are happening in District 15. So there are 2 active lawsuits. All the evidence has been presented and we're waiting for a ruling. I also want to mention that as far as the General Assembly maps are concerned, there's a lot of additional lawsuits have dropped in the last week. And one of the reasons for that is because basically what happened is, this is a little bit technical, but so there are all these different sets of maps, and then you're a candidate, and I'm sure Craig knows all about this. You're a candidate and you're trying to figure out, what's my district going to be? Where do I need to live? Where should I be filing? And so a lot of the filing deadline came down when the second set of maps had been proposed. And then the GOP used the information about who had filed where and where they lived and what districts they were in order to draw a third set of maps that would exclude certain candidates. So there are districts that lean Democratic, but they don't have a candidate because the candidates filed in other areas or they don't live there. So a number of lawsuits have popped up in the last week that are challenging that filing deadline or that are challenging the residency requirements. And that just happened. And yes, the Secretary LaRose instructed the boards of election not to accept the filings, but a number of candidates are hoping that changes. There's also a lawsuit that's been filed with a criminal complaint from the Democratic candidate who's running for Attorney General against members of the Redistricting Commission for dereliction of duty, because basically they broke the law. They were supposed to follow the Constitution. They were supposed to follow the court, and they didn't. That is a dereliction of duty. So we don't know what will happen with those lawsuits, but they're going to be interesting to follow. And I'm sure that they will, they were on expedited schedules, and we'll get some information soon. What do we do next? Do we go back to the ballot? Yes, we know that we need a better process, but just to kind of put it in perspective, getting a citizens initiative on the ballot and winning it is really, really hard in Ohio. Only 10 of 44 citizen initiative ballot measures have passed in 60 years. And those are usually ones that have bipartisan support. It's almost impossible to pass a citizens initiative in Ohio without bipartisan support. So it's not that we aren't going to try. I'm sure we are going to try. We're going to try to make a better process, but it's going to be a monumental effort. And I'm just going to speed through here. I'll just send you these slides. You guys can take a look and see. These are some suggestions of things that you can do. We have some great kind of social media graphics to share that are about fair maps. I included a link. You can, just tweet them out, etc. I included some articles about stuff that's going on this week with some of those lawsuits. We have monthly huddles And the next one is on, oops, not on June 3rd, actually June 8th, that is supposed to be. So that's it. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to put the link to that, those slides in the chat. And that's it.
Mia, I have a question. You showed
Yeah.
the maps that were drawn by the redistricting committee, the one that was constitutionally mandated, and the Republicans still had more seats. What was their problem with those maps? I don't understand why they didn't like them. They were still going to be in charge.
Well, the Republicans all, oh, you mean the independent map?
Yeah.
Good question. That's a really good question. None of the maps that were ever put forward by Democrats or by independent mappers ever had a Democratic majority. No, they only ever had something that was proportional, but proportional isn't good enough because they need to have a supermajority. They're afraid of actual elections. They want to be able to do whatever they want without being challenged. So just having what's fair is not good enough for them, you know, and this is what's incredibly aggravating. All the people that worked so hard for, you know, to change the Constitution, they were trying to do something that was fair for everyone. They weren't trying to get an advantage for one side or another. They were just trying to set rules that would be fair for everybody, but that wasn't good enough for the Republicans on the commission. They have to have a supermajority so that they can never be challenged and they never have to really run in real elections.
Wow. Well, thank you for that answer. It's not a good one. I mean, because of the people, but it's really a shame that that didn't work out because it was an ideal map. I think everyone would have been represented, and that's the point of constitutional government, democracy.
Yeah. Ask me how I really feel.
Well, how do you really feel?
You know, it's tragic because, you know, I really feel like these folks don't know what, you know, trouble they're bringing on our country. You know, and because, yeah, democracy is not great. There are many problems with democracy, but boy, oh boy, you don't really want to try the alternatives, you know, and democracy has this thing where you can try to make it better. At least I get it. There are a lot of problems with it. And it isn't fair, and it wasn't set up in our country to be fair. It was set up to be unfair for white men, but you know, we've been inching our way towards making it better. And if you undermine democracy, then you can't make it better, you know. And so you know, that's how I feel.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate all your hard work, and we'll try to support you any way we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nikki? Oh, wait, we have another question. I have a quick question from Dawn.
Okay, got to unmute myself first. I am just throwing out this question to Mia because a German friend of mine just asked this today. It's about the issue of people who are in prison or out of prison have committed a felony. How is this in Ohio? Can these people vote? I think so.
Yes.
And
In
what's happening?
Ohio, the only people who cannot vote are people who are currently serving a felony conviction sentence. So if you are in prison for a misdemeanor, if you are on parole, if you are on probation, if you are awaiting trial, if you have a past felony conviction that you've finished serving your sentence, all of those people can vote. However, most of those folks do not know that. You get taken off the rolls when you get convicted of a felony, and you have to re-register in order to vote. And a lot of folks are not told, by the way, you can re-register now. So when I go out and do voter registration, which I am going to do later today, I always say, if someone says to me, oh, I can't vote, I always say, oh, okay, well, the only folks in Ohio who can't vote are non-citizens and people who are currently serving a felony conviction. And more often than not, folks will say, oh, I didn't know that. I had a felony and I thought I wasn't allowed to vote. So we try to correct that.
Is that question still on the voter registration? Okay, how is this a vote from abroad? Because this is kind of, oh, wait a minute, no. Start over again. I thought that when I signed my ballot, that I have to say that I never committed this felony or something. It's not like that anymore. Okay, good, yeah. I don't know, thank you for setting me straight on that one too. Okay, good.
You do have to be a citizen. And
Yeah, sure.
an Ohio resident.
That's the hardest part.
Mia, that was just short, sweet, fast, and
Great.
extremely complete. Thank you. And I wanted to point out, as you did, that Laura Kugnow, who's on our team, is actually in Ohio Indivisible 12 too, and is out there tabling and registering voters the last couple of weeks.
She is
Angela,
a workhorse.
Yeah, seriously. And for us too, we're hoping, you know, as we get together. Angela, I'm going to jump over your bit here and just let everybody know, Llyn Flowers from the Ohio Democratic Party was supposedly going to be with us today, but let us know early this morning that there was a medical emergency and he couldn't make it. So if we have any information or questions to pass along to the party, we can let him know about this later. I would like to give the floor just for a few minutes to Craig Swartz. In January, when we did the kickoff, I sent, as I always do, I sent the invitation out to the county chairs. And there was this candidate for a House district up north in Wyandotte County who came to it. And I said to myself, that's a good candidate. He's picking up on every opportunity. Unfortunately, we're Democrats abroad. We can't endorse and we can't tell everybody about his candidacy, but Craig has passed his primary test in May. And he's here with us today. Craig, let us know, what's it like in District 5, just north of Jim Jordan?
Can you hear me okay? Good. It's going to be a very trying experience. This county, we have 12 counties in this district. So I run from Lorain in the farthest east, just west of Cleveland, all the way to the Indiana border. And unfortunately, when you look at the map that Mia just showed, it's kind of shaped like a gun, unfortunately. But David covered a lot of the points, and I'm going to go real quick here. The primary thing that we're focused on here is to run as hard as we can, get this message out in these rural areas. I ran a state Senate campaign 2 years ago, and we have not had an effective Democratic message in rural Ohio in a long, long time. And so part of my campaign is to run as hard as we can. I'm going to probably take one for the team, but the goal here is to get the rural count up to 40-45 percentile again. And then we're going to get our statewide elected. And as David said, the most important race is the Supreme Court. If we get the 3 Supremes elected, then we will stop these guys in their tracks, because it's exactly right. They played this out. They ran the clock out. Their ultimate aim is to control the court, the legislature, and the governor. You know, the governorship. So our task, my task, is to run real hard campaign, get the message out. There is a path, a slim path to victory for me, because Lorain County in my district constitutes 40% of the population. And Bob Lotta, my opponent, has never run in Lorain. I can at least lay some claim to knowing that area because I grew up on the west side of Cleveland and I spent some time in my childhood in Lorain. This is important. If I could define myself in Lorain County before Bob Lotta has a chance to, then there's an outside chance I could win that county, turn that blue, and it has a history of going blue, pick up a couple other counties that I think could go our way, like Wood County, which is where Bowling Green University is, and Mercer County is very strong. Then we mitigate the damage in the western counties. I might be able to slip by, but it's going to take all of the Democrats and the persuadables, because independents outnumber the Democrats and Republicans combined in almost every county in Ohio. And to Kenton's point earlier, One of the things that we screwed up, the Democratic Party screwed up on this primary, is that we did not communicate effectively what was going on, who was on the ballot in the first primary. I was speaking to women in Lorain County not that long ago who came up to me and thought they were voting for Marcy Kaptur when they went into the ballot box. So we did a really poor job of communicating effectively to Democratic voters in this primary, getting them ginned up, getting them excited. The other thing that I want to, again, echo what David was saying very quickly is, it is going to be the Supremes, that's going to be the major contest. We are going to really campaign on the Roe v. Wade. That disclosure has energized a lot of independent and even Republican women. This is a bridge too far that they've gone. So that disclosure is going to help, and that's going to run all the way to, the issue's going to run all the way to November. The gun issue is now really, really hot. I attended a Moms Demand Action rally yesterday in Elyria, very well attended. That's going to run hot for a while. We're going to run on that. And the last thing that our campaign is focused on is to bring the supply chain home. Again, going back to what David just said about manufacturing, these guys are discounting the effect that Ohio is ranked, it's still number 5 or 6 in the country, is one of the largest manufacturing economies in the country. And we are heavily invested already in renewable energy. We produce more solar panels than any other state. We do it right here. So we've got to be running on that, bringing that supply chain home. As I said before, going on with those other issues with Roe v. Wade and on the gun issue. Corruption, Liz Walters ran around the state going on about corruption, and David is right. That doesn't get the traction you want. You have to tie it into the voting rights and the economic rights. So they're obviously not caring about how your vote. They're trying to take it away from you. They're purging, they're redistricting, they're doing all these things to take away your vote. And they're also stealing from you because of the HB 6. And that's how I try to connect those issues. Say, look, they obviously don't care about this, and they don't care about your pocketbook. They're just going to steal outright from you. Sometimes that gets the people's attention because they hate getting ripped off. So it's a fairness issue. I'm open to take any questions.
One thing I wanted to throw in, when you go for Roe v. Wade, if that goes down, the other privacy issues that go down behind it, I'm not sure to what extent you've been able to tie that in. Certainly Roe v. Wade itself, just with the women.
Well, I've been able to tie that in, but I've also spoken to, I had a couple of Trumpsters who personally know me, called me after my primary and to congratulate me. We discussed that point, and I went to them saying, if you guys go down this road and you take away free will away from women, guess what? When the pendulum swings the other way, we're going after your guns. And this time it's going to happen because that's free will. That's connected.
Yeah,
and they don't see that other side of it.
Yeah, there's a whole other raft. We have a webinar here in Greece on Wednesday night, which is exactly about that, the extension with Loving and oh my God, they won't come to me over. I can't come with the names of the Supreme Court decisions that could go down on privacy issues right behind Roe v. Wade, and there's a raft of them. Other questions? Not too many right now. I think we've been on an hour and a half.
Yeah,
Kenton had one.
Oh, go ahead.
I had one. I sent it to me. I'm sorry. Craig, I was just noticing that you're in Ohio 5. I used to vote in Ohio 5 before the gerrymandering, and now I'm in District 9, which is where I should have been in the entire time since I'm from Toledo. However, looking at your compositional makeup, you said that you're hoping to get the Lorain County and also Wood County. I think that the students in Bowling Green area probably would be more favorable to you, but then the Toledo suburbs such as Perrysburg, Rossford tend to be a little bit problematic. What are you doing to get your message out to those particular people? Because I think that if you can get those people, the Toledo suburbs in Wood County, then you could actually probably pull this off.
Right, Wood County is the second most important county. So for me, unfortunately, Kenton, Perrysburg and Rossford are going to be in Marcy's district. So they took out that corner of Wood County and put it in Marcy's. So Marcy and I are actually going to be campaigning together quite a bit. Bowling Green, I just spoke to the Wood County Dems the other day to that effect. So we're going to get them energized. We're going to get the Wood County Young Dems are extremely well organized. We're going to get the Bowling Green vote. When it comes to college kids, though, you got to make sure that they're registered in that district, because when they go home or they might be re-registering somewhere else. When they come back to class in the fall, we got to make sure we do those voter drives right and we get them registered in the district to switch over. But Bowling Green's going to be important. I was in Oberlin last night. That's going to be an important university or college town for me. Actually, Lorraine Community College. I'm going to be speaking up there. I'm going to have some events going on during especially when they come back in September. That's extremely important to energize the youth vote. We've got to get them out. This is when I talk about my campaign, it's always about leaving it better for the next generation. And this is unfinished business. The fact that we have to relitigate Roe v. Wade, we got to take care of the guns still, and all these other issues, trade and stuff like that. It's unfinished business. This is 40 years in the making. Both Democratic and Republican parties are guilty of this. They outsourced the jobs. They destroyed these small towns scattered throughout Ohio that used to have strong manufacturing centers. These were the economic drivers for these communities. And when we lost this capability, these are the ties that came undone for all these communities. That's where the drugs come in, the dilapidation, the schools start suffering, and then they wonder why we've got the issues that we have today. So it's a matter about bringing that supply chain back home. It really is. And strengthening these communities, spreading the wealth as much as you can throughout Ohio.
Wow, Craig, thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck. And I 1000% agree with you. We have to bring the supply chain home. When I grew up in Ohio was a powerhouse. People moved to Ohio, not fled from it, because you could make a good living and have a decent life there. And that's what we're all working for in the Ohio team, is to get our overseas voters and our voters at home to come out. So everybody that's watching this, because we are streaming this live on Facebook, and it's also going to be available, of course, on our YouTube channel to watch, and people can watch it on many platforms. Please remember to vote. If you're overseas, go to votefromabroad.org to request your absentee ballot. If you're in the United States, go to iwillvote.com to verify that you're registered, because as we've heard, people are being disenfranchised. They're being kicked off the rolls. So you can re-register even if you've been kicked off. It's really important. If you're watching this on some platform other than Facebook, or if you're watching it on Facebook, join our Ohio Wins Abroad Facebook group. And you can also join our Ohio Wins Abroad team and help us get out the vote. If you're just watching this and you're like, what can I do? The best thing to do is to find 5 people who didn't vote in the last election and get them registered and take them to vote. So with that, I want to thank David Pepper and Mia Lewis, also Craig. I'd like to thank Art, our International Vice Chair, for coming on, and everyone. Our next large event is on July 10th at 4 p.m. Central European Time and at 10 a.m. in Eastern Time. And we'll be at the same location. So please join us for then. Later.
Yeah.
Later.
I think it's 1 p.m. Ohio time, so that people have a chance to get home.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's really late. It's really late. But please join us for our next event. And if you're interested in volunteering, you can join we meet every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 Eastern Time. So with that, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.